Storytelling is an incredibly important skill, but for a startup company, storytelling is essential. Not only do you need to convey the value of what you're bringing to market, you have to tell the story of where it is all going and what it could be. Finding those genuine moments can be difficult, but they are so rewarding. Today, we're going to be talking with an expert storyteller, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, this is Chris Brandt here with Sundish Patel. Welcome to another future podcast. If you could, please give us a like and think about subscribing because that helps the channel an absolute ton. Today we have with us Donna Loughlin, founder of the LMGPR Public Relations firm and the host of the amazing Before It Happened podcast, where she tells the origin stories of visionary leaders. Now, Donna grew up in a newspaper family and got exposure to the craft of journalism from a young age. She later shifted her focus to working in technology and helped those companies find their unique voice. Now she does it for many companies through her PR firm. She also gets to regularly share those stories through her podcast. So let's welcome Donna and hear about her journey, how important storytelling is to a business, and what she has learned from talking to so many visionaries. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you. That's all true, believe it or not.
Good. I like to be truthful sometimes. So, like I mentioned in the intro there, you've got a really interesting sort of origin story yourself, and you get everybody else's origin story, but you probably don't get a chance to tell yours too often. So, I would love to hear, your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I grew up in the Sunshine State of California, when it was majestically known as the Land of Heart's Delight, with full of apricots and cherries, but there was always tech, within proximity.
Sure.
One of the first techs in the valley was the Lick Observatory, and it was quite a story about that, and the hauling up the lens from all the way from France, and on freight ships, then up a hill, the cargo, pulled carts. So I think the Silicon Valley has always, been that area of curiosity and entrepreneurship and pioneers, not just in agriculture, but in early stages of tech and emerging markets.
Right.
And I think that growing up in that backyard really ignited my curiosity. Anything that was in popular science or popular mechanics or at a science fair or at the local state fair, I was pretty much, enamored with.
It sounds like a sort of idyllic place to grow up. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, you kind of come from a journalism background, a family of journalists. Could you speak to that a little bit?
My father and his brothers owned a whole publishing chain of community papers. So you think about, you have Pulitzer Prize winning, regional papers. And in the case of the Silicon Valley, it was the San Jose Mercury News was that Pulitzer Prize paper. But up the peninsula, you'd have San Francisco Chronicle and Examiner. Well, there's a lot of little papers in between in cities like Palo Alto and Mountain View and Half Moon Bay and Los Gatos and Fresno and East Bay, different regions. And all those community papers had news and current events and activities and things that are happening in kind of like the neighborhood as well as the given zip code. And so there were 40 some papers that were part of that network. And as young as 8, I was out following my uncles doing stories. I would pop in with them and watch them interview the local mom and pop shop, or it was, some ribbon cutting event or some other activity. I saw one of the first commercial airlines take off at San Jose Airport.
Wow.
So those are the types of things I was exposed to. And then I was able to eventually write when I was around 10.
That's amazing, young experience. It's such a shame that local journalism has really disappeared. I mean, that was so important, back in the day, those papers, not just the big national ones, but those little local community ones were such a big part of the community, and now all that seems gone.
Yeah, well, a lot of them have been acquired, by bigger publishing houses in the digital age. Ultimately, everything just became digital. But what was great about my experience is I was actually got to see the entire printing process, that the typesetting, the layout, the publishing process, editorial, the informational gathering. So by the time I studied journalism in college, I already had like a 10-year career, which was kind of crazy to think about. And my mother insisted I learn to type, which I was totally against. And I went in college being able to type 150 words a minute, which meant that I could get a job typing. That afforded me to be able to get into the newsroom. And when I got a little clever and a little, I want to say, sneaky, I'd actually would rewrite the headlines or rewrite some of the copy that I was writing for the editor I was working for. And eventually one day I got called in. And I was told to pack up my stuff that was on my desk and put it in the box, and I needed to go to the second floor. Well, on the second floor, resources was there, but there also was the executive leadership team was there. The opportunity that was afforded to me by being, a little sneaky, I was promoted from the copy desk of just rewriting and basically typing everyone's copy to the editorial department, where I became an editorial assistant, which meant I had assignments and I got to go out and be a reporter. And I would see my stories come back with more red ink than I'd ever imagined in my life. But that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it disciplined me and refined my skills and my editing and my AP style like nobody's business.
I have printing in my background as well. I worked in educational publishing and that sort of thing too. So it's like, I think there's something to, those kinds of, understanding how it all comes together and, how writing works and, that whole process that is a little bit of a lost art these days.
Absolutely. Did you edit college textbooks? So I edited more than 80 college textbooks one summer. Computer science and math books, and probably not my best subjects. So the fact that they hired me to do that meant that I had a really good eye for detail. And my father even was a little concerned, because I always felt I needed to apply math to something, like flying a plane. When I was really little, I learned how to fly a plane when I was 12 years old. But I could apply my math to something. If I could apply it to cooking or to flying or something. And here I was editing computer science and math books, not really knowing what I could apply it with to. And fortunately, there were college professors and grad students that were the ones that are really testing the algorithms and the problems to making sure that they were accurate, not me.
Yeah, no, I primarily worked K through 12 books. I had the pleasure of working on that Houghton Mifflin math program that destroyed math literacy in California, the visual verbal approach. But but it was it's an interesting education, and now when I'm like editing my kids' papers, I use proper notation for editing markups, so they have to learn what stet means and things like that.
Yeah, I think what I learned from each one of these opportunities was to take a new skill and apply it to the next one and to the next one and to the next one. And oftentimes people are so focused that they get out of school, they have to have that dream job out of the gate. Within 5 years, they have to climb the ladder, or they didn't achieve anything. And so I felt that early on in as an editor and then a reporter, going from internships. My internships in college were the Washington Post, which is a really prestigious newspaper, to do an internship. I did an internship with Reuters, and then eventually hired by Reuters, and then reported with them, and then ultimately to BBC, and then back to Silicon Valley, which I thought I would never come back to. But each one of those pin drops was really important in establishing my career, as well as just the knowledge along the way.
I think that's amazing. And I got to imagine that plays really well into sort of the next phase of your life in sort of the tech and PR side of the equation.
As I said, I never imagined myself back in the Silicon Valley, because the Silicon Valley that I knew wasn't called the Silicon Valley. It was agriculture meets, kind of this emerging tech. And I wanted to go out and see the world. So I wanted, adventure. I wanted experiences. I wanted to savor other cultures and food and just, have, more than a Kodak moment, right? And I think sometimes we get too comfortable with our zip codes and we don't explore. And it's not meant for everybody. But for me, I needed to go to 82 countries to get to basically have my lens expand and my mind expand, beyond. And so when I came back, the Valley, it was intentionally to go to grad school at UC Berkeley. And so I was in grad school, but the journalism communications grad program also requires you to have a working job. And so my working job, I took a job with a tech media outlet. And I remember my first day, I knew how to use a Mac, and they gave me a PC, and I had no idea what to do. And I thought, how can I be a reporter in the tech segment if I can't even use this computer? So I went to my first assignment with a dusty old notepad because I didn't want to be, embarrass myself. And that first interview I went to was at Hewlett Packard, and I was like, well, I'm going to walk in with a computer I don't know how to use. Is going to be totally embarrassing. So I took my little tape recorder and I took my notepad, and on my way out, they said, wow, is the publication hurting so much you don't have laptops? So they basically outfitted the entire editorial team within a few weeks. They can thank me for that. And so that was kind of like the onset of that digital era of being able to, we had dial-up access. We didn't have, all you can eat, buffet internet access. And so I was part of that networking boom, and then I was part of the whole internet boom, and then eventually left that world and worked with a number of startups and took them through IPOs. I think I did 5 IPOs. And then eventually I opted to go out and start my own business, LMGPR, which stands for Leadership, Momentum, and Growth.
I'm kind of amazed, though, that you went to HP with a tape recorder and a notepad, and they didn't appreciate the old school vibe that you were bringing.
Well, they're known as the oldest startup, right?
Right. I mean, you'd think if any company's going to appreciate it, that it's going to be HP.
Yeah.
You've started a PR firm. One of the things that we always see, because Sandesh and I work with a lot of startups, and we work with a lot of the venture capital side and a lot of the portfolio companies of those, firms. And one of the things that we always see is that they really struggle on the marketing side. They really struggle communicating the basic value proposition. They really struggle to put together a clear message that really communicates what they're doing, right? Obviously that's an incredibly important part of bringing something to market. Could you talk a little bit about like what you see and how you help people, like you made mention of, talking about finding those genuine moments?
Yeah, it's a little bit like photography. And I always tell people that it's not enough to go out and take a picture, at 10 o'clock a.m. You need to go look at it at noon, and then you need to go look at it again at 10 p.m. And maybe under different weather conditions, right? And I think oftentimes product companies are exactly that. They're product centric, and they focus on not the impact. They focus on the features and the benefits and what it does. I always like to start with it, go through the discovery process. So what? Who cares? Why did you create it to begin with? What's the problem you're solving? And how is that problem actually enabling, augmenting, accelerating, or whatever for businesses, particularly getting to the root cause of who your customer is in the business. So if we just focus on the what we call speeds and feeds and all the things you find in fine print on the user guide, it's not really an authentic story. So going to the founder's journey, or if it's a team or a more mature company, and there's a team of product and development people talking to the industrial designer, talking to the engineering team, talking to the business development team, looking at horizontally all the different facets of people involved in the product. And if they're beta customers, great, talk to the beta customers. If there's no beta customers, oftentimes I'm helping to find those beta customers so we can validate that there really is no mission impossible, that the impact that the product is making is more important than just the in-the-box experience. And so I think that's what I love about unboxings is that's fairly new market process, but I think they help validate that.
I love what you're saying. You're totally speaking our language. Chris and I talk about this all the time. It doesn't matter how great your widget is or software is if nobody understands what you do and how you do it. But the hard part, what I have found has been, it seems like that should be easy. If you go to a founder and you say, hey, tell me about your company, tell us your 10x value proposition. Why is it that we got to have you? What is that problem that you're solving? Why did you start this company? And how many times does that question lead to a 5-minute answer? It's like you really want to narrow it down. It's who are you? What is your personality? Why should anybody care? Would you agree that that's actually it seems like it should be simple, but it's actually easier said than done?
Yeah, the positioning, I think oftentimes people skip the positioning and they go straight to the product, the packaging and selling the product, and haven't tested, or benchmarked and their, competitive research. And I always ask, do you have any original research, any original from the lab, live from the lab data? Particularly when I work with cybersecurity companies, one of the things I loved about the cybersecurity space is that the data scientists and researchers would always have validated data that I can use. If you take that same type of process, the same type of that you would if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, and you take that data and you can use that to support and substantiate what is exactly bring it to the market, whether it's a consumer, product that you put in your pocket, or it's a smart car or smart home, that information becomes really invaluable so that people can. I go into a big box store or a show like CES, and I look at products and think, do I need that? Or do I already have something? It's like a Swiss Army knife. Do I already have something that exists? Is this replacement? I'm a little bit of a late adopter, to be honest, because I like to see things kind of shake out. I remember when I was young, my father said we couldn't have a video player because, it was like, what was wrong with the projector we had, right? And so kind of waiting, for that next thing. And I think that's one of the challenges when I see when younger companies bringing their first product to market. They're so excited about packaging it and putting it and promoting it, but they didn't necessarily do the homework. And I'm the one that has to come into the room and say, we're not ready. We need to be able to do, have some focus groups. We need to talk to the market analysts. We need to know who, what the competitive information is before taking it to market. Maybe it's a jumpstart kind of preview, light launch before we go to, the next level. I'm not the biggest fan of pre-order campaigns or, the traditional ones, Indiegogo and the those types, because Kickstarter, because I've seen so many fail. Failure is good, but I don't think in that particular showcase.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned security, because I think, Sundish and I talk about this all the time. We really struggle with security companies because they have such a difficult time communicating their value proposition. And ultimately, a lot of the times the value proposition comes down to my AI is better than your AI, which is a really hard thing to demonstrate, right? And so it sounds like you are helping them get to the meat of what it is they're actually doing. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'll give an example. I work with FireEye, which is, became a publicly traded company. I worked with them before they became, around the time they were literally, I think there were 40 employees.
Yeah, they were a revolutionary company in their early days.
Yeah, and then all the way through their IPO, and then they got acquired several times since then.
Yeah,
but working with the research team, the CTO, CEO of the company, fabulous, brilliant team, but getting access to the customers and access to the CTO and the CSOs from their customer set in the early days were instrumental. Getting access to real-time takedowns. I had a cover story, with the company really fairly early on within the first year, which is early, to be in the cover of Business Week, because we had this huge takedown that happened in Microsoft, and Microsoft gave us permission. The reason why Microsoft gave us permission is I had been curating that particular customer for over 6 months by the time it happened, right? And so being able to not just, again, face value, what the product is and what it does, but the impact that it can make. And so I did, similar with other security companies like Palo Alto Networks and Creative Labs and just a bunch of other companies that were in the space that wanted to ensure that their customers were being protected, by cyber crimes and activities. But it also applies into other spaces. I've had a lot of experience in the last 10 years working with I'm called robotics and automation in cars, motorcycles and electric bikes. And these are markets that are established, but they're being kind of the reset button, in terms of bringing new technologies into market. And how do you actually explain to somebody that you need to give up fossil fuels, whether you're a farmer or you're a commuter or, you're using it for heavy equipment? There's a huge convergence of things that are happening. The cybersecurity, that for specifically for for takedowns like with FireEye, a lot of that security and functionality is now in our cars. It's in our homes, right? And so a lot of the fundamental components have evolved, and the convergence of technology, I think, is just amazing. I mean, whoever thought that we needed a smart vacuum cleaner? But the bigger problem with the smart vacuum cleaner is now that is an IoT device that has security vulnerabilities. Right. Who's listening? And so those are the things that fascinate me, is the evolution of technologies and how they come together in our home, in our pocket, and in our car. Right. And I think that we're a little spoiled in North America. I think Silicon Valley particularly lives in the bubble of early adopters, and we think that everybody in every state and every country has these luxury items, and it's not. True. So I go back to that lens that I mentioned, having traveled 80 some countries, having an experience of being able to go. My 3 favorite places when I go to any city is I like to go to the farmer's market. What are people eating? How, what is their interactions? How are their engagements? Are they talking, multiple languages? Are they all on their smart devices? Do they have any engagement? Then going to, I would always has to go from that to some form of local food. Like, what do the locals eat? And sitting at the counter, not at a table, and having conversations with people. And then my 3rd place is I always like to go to the library, because the library is also a microcosm of what's happening. You see whether or not they actually are using digital systems, or is it a coffee house versus a library, and just being part of that. Of that community. Yeah. Most communities have those 3 different, I'm going to call them micro, pools of activity. I don't look for the Starbucks. I don't look for, the whatever, fandangled thing that we might have in the Western world. But if you go to the Midwest, you go to the South, you go to the East, you go to the, Eastern Europe, or you go to Western Europe or South or Latin America, you're going to find a farmer's market, you're going to find a library, and you're going to find a place to eat. So to me, those are the same things when you bring a product to market. You need to know in terms of, your customer set, what are they, what is their psyche? What is their, what is the demographics, and how are they thinking before people like me and people like you buy this product? It can't be one size fits all.
So how do you turn that into good storytelling?
So one of my favorite stories, is talking, to the CEO of Damon Motorcycles as a client, and I've been working with them for a few years. And the CEO and the founder of the company, he was a snowboarder that happened to go into the automotive, transportation space because of his personal angst with what was happening with the oil crisis. And this is not our recent oil crisis. This is the past oil crises that we've had. We've had a few. And to think, what does a snowboarder from British Columbia know about solving, the world oil problem? But he was also passionate about motorcycles, and he knew, enough about friction and gas, and so he really thought about it. And I think that's fascinating, and that's that type of beginnings and origin of it could have been totally buried in the company's story. And the other side of the end, a beautiful high-performance electric motorcycle that is going to disrupt the entire industry. But the founder's passion, himself and the co-founder, and what they stand for and what they amplify with the output of the product go hand in hand. Steve Jobs became Steve Jobs because of the passion and the fact that he can look at things differently, right? Right. And it's that whole keep it simple, stupid scenario, was spot on. And I think there's a lot of people aspire that they want to be Steve Jobs, but they're not going to be Steve Jobs because they just don't have it. It's like teaching someone to cook a family recipe. Is that some people just have that it factor and others don't. So my job is to help them find that it factor. And being able to zoom in and say, well, when you were a child, were you playing with Legos? Were you playing with Linkalog? Were you doing Tetris? What were your curiosities and passions? I interviewed someone the other day, and it was so fun. He is an inventor. He's in an Inventors Hall of Fame. He's a lifelong inventor. He worked on the stealth plane, and I was fascinated because I fly. He also worked on the Galileo project. He also happens to be the inventor of Super Soaker. And I was like, wow, But what was really fascinating about him is that there was this common thread of relentless curiosity and invention and passion. And then I also thought it was pretty cool that he, and as a college student, he engineered the audio sound system for the Commodores when they came into town when he was in college, because their sound system was horrible. And I thought, so I had to ask him, have you stayed in touch with Lionel Richie? Does he know that you're in the Inventors Hall of Fame and have received, uncountable awards, hundreds of patents, that young boy that fixed his system, that helped launch his career? And I think those are the types of stories that we forget about.
Yeah.
That we forget about that teacher that inspired you in third grade, or that professor that actually ignited something in you that said, you know what? Anything's possible. I'm going to take on this problem and to move forward and achieve that. So those are the things that, that I would say, my curiosities relentlessly are looking forward to discover. Ask a lot of questions. And my father always told me, Rocky, if you don't ask, you don't know. And so he's the one that kind of pushed me out there at 10, because I would ask questions and he would say, why don't you just go with your uncle? And I would go with my uncle. Then I'd come back with the story. And I was the worst trick-or-treater because the door would open and I would say, oh, wow. Is that a Black Forest clock? Or is that a Sir Henry Rayburn painting? Or is, and I was like, just get the candy. But it's okay. Like, instead of going to therapy, I made a career with it.
I think you and I could vacation together.
For sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Your hobby is picking up hobbies.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
I find this just as fascinating to go to Ace Hardware. I know that sounds really strange, but to me, going to Ace Hardware was a little bit like going to Tandy Radio Shack was in the 70s until the early 80s, is that you never knew what you were going to come out with, but you can come out with some form of gizmo. And I'm like, Ace Hardware, sometimes I just push myself out of my comfort zone and going, do I need that? I don't know, that drill looks pretty good. Or just, looking at the nuts and bolts of things. And I look at that, but I stand back and I say, well, how does this is the same way I look at things. I'm looking at the nuts and bolts. And maybe that's why I like that, type of environment, because I kind of have to figure out how all the pieces go together.
Yeah, when my wife sends me out to get stuff, she's always astonished as to why I disappeared for like 2-3 hours before coming back with, like a nut in a bolt. It's like I get lost in those places. Yes. Well, I used to take my son when he was little. I take him to Home Depot when he was getting all antsy, and we just go and flip all the switches. They have the wall of like the different light switches, and then we'd open he loved opening all the different washing machines and dryers, and that was his thing when he was like a year and a half, 2 years old.
That's funny. Well, I think that sense of discovery and curiosity is what sometimes we lose as adults. We get very busy and we get one-dimensional in looking at things. So when it comes to bringing, I work with a diverse set of clients, and as robotics and autonomous and cybersecurity and consumer products. But the one thing they all have in common is that they all are Imagineers in a sense, right? Of imagining, a better future and solving something. I say no a lot though too. Sometimes I get pitches and see product demonstrations of things that I'm like, do we already have that? So Inspector Gadget comes to me and shows me 10 different things in their pocket. It's usually there's one thing in there that's probably going to make it. And a lot of my clients, they repeat. They come, they create a company, they sell it successfully, they come back, and I that to me is really joyful, is because I love being challenged. And sometimes some of these companies come to me and I go, I don't really know anything about that. So and then I realized, no, I actually do. So I work with an electric tractor company. And when he first called me, I was so excited because I thought, wow, I know him from transportation when he was had a transportation project. And 5 years later, he calls me and says, I don't think that you're going to want to work on this. He goes, I don't think this is up your alley. And then I laughed and I said, oh my goodness, the company's Monarch Tractor. And I said, Praveen, I said, I got my master's thesis in the democratization of the farm labor movement. And I said, so I have been wanting to work on something agriculture related, being a California girl, grew up in amongst miles and miles and miles of agriculture. This is what I wanted to be a part of this.
Yeah.
And I realized that it had artificial intelligence, it had robotics, it had autonomous components, it had a purpose, it had a global purpose. It was, it helped combat things that are related to labor shortages and climate change and sustainability. It was beefy. And I almost fell off my chair when he called. And 2 years later, we're getting ready to roll out the first commercial graded tractor. And to me, that story is exactly what I was describing, is that you kind of go through the nuts and bolts and you look at everything. And it's more than a tractor story. It's more than a tractor. It's about the future of farming. It's the future of agriculture. It's the future of tracking and being responsible, not just sustainable when it comes to the food that we eat. And I think, when I worked with supply chain companies in the past, they would always talk about the platform and this thing. And I said, can we talk about the prom dress? And they're like, what? And at the prom dress, like, how is the 16-year-old girl living in Chicago, going to get her prom dress in time to make one of her, milestone moments in her life happen? That's a supply chain story, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to hear about, how it works. I want to know why it works.
I keep thinking, as you're like talking about a lot of this stuff, when Chris and I meet with a lot of these startups, and we're usually speaking with the founders, at that point, what I often find is they are not always the best qualified to really define their message. But yet it's their baby, they're developing it. And so they have this connection with it. But it's hard for them to separate, because they're so excited about the speeds and feeds, quite honestly, right? But do you find that to be a consistent challenge?
Yeah, I think it's zooming in and being able to curate that to something that they're comfortable with. So I'll give you an example. Oftentimes CTOs are, super, brilliant, but you have to give them a platform they're comfortable with. So I've had a CTO I worked with in the past who, really liked race cars, but he couldn't articulate. He wasn't a race car driver. He just fascinated with fast cars, and I found that through conversation. And I love slow cooking and fast cars. I always tell people. I was like, and so I chatted with him about that, and I said, well, how does this apply to the artificial intelligence process, and how you're actually bringing artificial intelligence to the market, and how important it is in whether it's trucking or, it's cars or transportation or it's forensics or whatnot. And then I ended up creating a platform that he could talk about it, but in a means of using his favorite hobby, which was watching, Formula One racing. And it just gave him a comfortability. I remember when I worked with Dr. Bob Metcalf, the founder of 3Com and the creator of Ethernet. And I didn't realize at the time when I met him how important that conversation would be to me, 30 years later. But it was because he broke down technology to me to like a mustard seed and to the way that I could understand it. And I realized the experts don't necessarily be able to articulate what it is, the impact that they're making. They are the knowledge experts. My job is to curate that, take that information, curate it, water it, nurture it, and help them become more than the logo on their t-shirt. A brand is more than when the logo is on a t-shirt. And oftentimes people think that, I got that t-shirt logo, like we're a brand. And Dr. Bob Metcalf was so humble. And I remember years later running into him, and he had written a series of books on how things work. And I bought the books from one of my nephews, who was equally as curious as I was at the same age. And he signed them all. And he when I went back to look and see how he signed in the book, he says, always be curious, always ask questions, always be aware. And I thought, wow, that's so important to not just your cognitive thinking, but as a child, and that curiosity and wonder, that apply that through the storytelling process. And so that art of discovery, being able to zoom in on something, I think that is unique. And I think it also applies. I'm writing a book, and I will get it done eventually. But one of the things focus is so important in writing a book. So focus, instead of editing someone's, writing your own book is a lot of focus. But one of the things that I realized in my discovery process of my book is that the same process I help clients and businesses go through to bring their products to market, to be granular focused and have a key differentiation, positioning, is the same that one should be looking at their own career. So if you're just out of college and you have a resume, and I don't care how beautiful it looks, and I don't care what your TikTok, looks like, or your Instagram, or any of that, but how do you articulate and tell your own personal narrative of who you are as you advance in your career and you want to, exit and go out and be an entrepreneur? Oftentimes people just look at the obvious. It's the degrees, it's their accomplishments. I'm like, so what? Who cares? I always wanted to interview when I was looking for employees, like, give me an Eagle Scout. Give me the guy who worked swing shift at 7-Eleven. Give me somebody who actually took a gap year and built houses or swam the English Channel, right? Like, those are the people that I think are like really interesting. And often through my discussions with founders, I'll find something. Praveen Pametswa at Monarch grew up on a farm in India. He left India to get away from the farm. And I think it's fascinating that years later, he's creating a tractor that's disrupting that entire process because he just wanted to design cool cars.
Right. Well, you can take the boy out of the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the boy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that type of passion, I'm fortunate to work with a Dr. Bernuti, who has hundreds of patents in the medical space, mostly commercial grade products that for medical practitioners. But in the middle of the pandemic, he created a product that was for us, the rest of us and consumers. And when I started interviewing and finding out that this low-grade UV light can actually zap the way it would for an orthopedic surgeon, could actually germify and our keyboards and our plane trays and anything that we might have in a busy world. Oh, that was interesting. But then I found out he had 6 children. And then I thought that was really interesting because I said, oh, so you're at work all day long. You're a doctor. You're doing surgery. But it's the 6 kids with the germs. You know what kids are, right? They're the petri dishes of society. They bring everything home. I thought, okay, so now he's a human. He's not just a super, doctor and he's superhuman, but now I've humanized him. And so then that's a story that for him to be able to talk, I'm a doctor, but I'm also a father of 6 kids. Yeah. Is really different than just saying I'm an MD and I created this thing. And so that's the part of the joy of the process.
Yeah, I absolutely love your curiosity. I love your ability to sort of break down the whole process and see the beauty in the parts. And that brings me around to the Before It Happened podcast, because I think you kind of bring a lot of that to the Before It Happened podcast, which is great, by the way. I've been listening to episodes and I've been really enjoying them. So I recommend everybody go out and check out the podcast. But could you just give us the breakdown of what it is and what you do?
So Before It Happened podcast was basically my excuse for not writing my book. I was started the book, and then the pandemic came, and then I'm like, I gotta isolate myself, and I'm going to be in my home office writing away, and I opted that I wanted to do a podcast, and so I made a long list. If I had a podcast, what could it be? And then all the things that I thought it could be, then I realized I went through my own cathartic process. It's like, well, it needs to be what I'm an expert on, obviously. And then after that, who are the people that I can invite to the show? Who would be the first, I like to think Dirty Dozen and Nifty 50, like who it could be. And then I thought, okay, this is interesting. And then I looked at every single process platform on the marketplace, and I said, oh my gosh, I'd like to go to Ace Hardware, but this is not a do-it-yourself, project here. So I created a team, and I thought, okay, I know I can interview, I can find a guest, but when it comes to editing and production and all that, I was a little outside of my color wheel. So Before It Happened, really is a show that showcases visionaries in the future they imagine. And so some they're scientists, they're doctors, they're experts in climate change and sustainability and aerospace. And I have stories that are just kind of remarkable in the sense that you wouldn't expect them. One of my favorites is, David Boca, who was an aerospace engineer for Boeing. And he decided that he wanted to make vegan cheese because he became Sicilian that became vegan. That was itself. Sicilians aren't usually vegan at all.
Right.
And so why would one do that? And so capturing, stories from inventors like the inventor of the sports bra launched an entire industry. The inventor, of Pong launched an entire gaming industry.
Sure.
People that are really change makers and agents of change. And only a small percentage of them are my clients. There's a great portion that are not. They're just interesting stories that I either read something about them, rip and tore out of a magazine or saw it online or heard them at a conference. And I think there's stories that need to be heard because they are risk takers and they are people that are changing the world for, the better of us. And so next 2023, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. Most of the episodes are narration. I'm going to do a couple of a special kind of live from the field type pieces. And eventually the book will follow. The book will basically be the art of creating your narrative, both for your personal narrative, but for your business, your emerging market or product that you're bringing to market. I need to get that, what I call the Pocket Pal version of my career. And if you're not familiar with Pocket Pal is a publishing guideline. Chris, I think you probably know what it is.
I remember the Pocket Pal.
Yep. I took it everywhere, and it basically teaches you everything that you need to know about printing. It's still used, even in the digital world. It's still being, used. It's like, what about colors and pagination and all those pieces. So my Pocket Pal version of wisdom will come out in 2023.
That sounds amazing. I got to say, it's been great talking to you. I really appreciate it. If people want to check out your podcast, where's the best way to go and find it?
It's on all major platforms. So Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon. It's Before It Happened Show on Instagram. And I think we produced more than 60 so far. So we're still pretty early on.
Yeah.
But we have, going into next year, half a year already in the canister, as they say. I'm always looking for guests. Anybody has any referrals, looking for amazing people. I'd love to be able to get a couple amazing kids on the show too. Like kids that are doing something amazing and not just hanging out on TikTok and Instagram and posting stuff, but kids that are actually, there's some entrepreneurs out there. And so the next generation, I'm a huge fan of STEM and STEAM education and mentoring. And I really would like to, have that moment where, I have this Doogie Howser-esque, type of guest on the show.
I can see you having Chris's son on your show. He's still a little young, but man, this kid he's got it. He's got the special sauce. Plus, look at his dad.
Oh God.
But is he creative, Chris?
He just is like, he's a very self-directed learner and he's very interest-driven, right? Which is not great for school, but it's great for the rest of his life, right? And so he, I always joke about the one time I walked into his room and he's like, "Oh, look, I'm playing the premium version of this." I'm like, "How did you pay for the premium version?" He's like, "Oh, I just started, mining Bitcoin and I've been making enough money every month to buy this." He's 11 years old. And I'm like, "What? What do you do? Where?"
Yeah.
And like lately he's like, "Oh, plug this USB, dongle in and see what happens." I'm like, "I'm not plugging that into my computer." But he goes and gets my wife and it's, things pop up and he steals passwords and he does all this stuff. And I'm like, he's 12 years old, it's like, oh man, this is going to be trouble.
Does he code too?
He does code and he just absolutely loves it. And then he's off, he learned Final Cut Pro by himself. He just picked it up and learned it. Then he went over and he learned DaVinci Resolve and now he's doing Blender and he's really got a knack for picking those things up.
I needed him to be my IT guy when I walked in with the wrong computer into HP years ago.
He was the IT guy for the school, for his
yeah, exactly.
Elementary school. The guy who did all the repairs had him just working there. Like when my son was getting bored in the classroom or whatever, they'd send him off to the IT department and he'd repair all the laptops and fix the computers and stuff in the school. So
he's a wonder kid. I think we might have a show. You're right, Sandesh.
Yeah, he's great.
He's a wild kid. He's fun. Donna, I got to say, this has been a really awesome conversation. I think, Yeah, tons of great information, lots of things to think about here. And I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much for being a guest. And look forward to seeing what you do next, and watching your show.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is how I spent my happy hour today. So,
Me too.
I just my last bit of wisdom is for any entrepreneurial, anybody who's a critical thinker who wants to bring a product or something to market, is don't forget my example about photography.
Yeah.
Go look at things differently several times a day. Look at it different seasons, and as I say, for different seasons and reasons. And stop looking waist high. Look up. There's some amazing things that happen when you look up, or look all the way down. But it's like sometimes people don't think about, like, the leaves are changing in certain, like in fall, and the beautiful in the Midwest right now, California. Look up. You might see a drone. You might, there's, I fly. So I always look up when I hear a plane or something buzzing ahead. And one of my favorite things about flying is I look at things very differently when I'm up there. I also have a lot of responsibility to make sure that I'm, in check with everything.
Yeah.
And so looking at things differently. Alice in the Looking Glass was, means something totally different to me than it might to others. But look, and just keep looking and exploring, and then you're going to find, that impact statement that we were talking about.
Yeah, I once got a bit of advice. It was, walk at half speed, and just take it all in and see what you find. It's amazing when you just slow down and look at what's around you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully the next generation takes Creed too.
Yes. Well, thanks so much for being on.
At least your son will.
Yes. Hopefully he continues. So thanks so much for being on. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you like what you saw, give us a like and subscribe. That subscription helps the channel a ton. And I will see you in the next one.